If there were one story that I could shout from the rooftops and get everybody in the world to see and focus on, it would be the success that the Russians have had in buying out American politics, by buying out podcasters, by buying out influencers, by buying out writers, by buying out professors and think tanks. And so that's the focus of today's episode. I want to draw attention to that. Now, if you're watching a video such as this one, you're well aware of the tenant media uh, case came out in early September. The DOJ has tenant media dead to rights. They took $10 million directly from Kremlin agents to promote Kremlin talking points and narratives among their podcasters. And they've got some big names. We've got Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, millions of followers among them. When this came out, people were replaying Tim Pool yelling into his microphone that Ukraine is somehow the enemy of the United States, right? And the thread here, the golden thread, the Occam's razor, is just listen to people who are making political statements that are arguing for morals and values, and listen to the things that they are not saying. And, all of these men here will want you to believe that they're on the side of right and they're on the side of truth, but they have almost nothing to say about Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine, about the tens of thousands of children who have been kidnapped, about the dozens, hundreds of torture sites that have been set up in every town and village that the Russians have invaded and taken over, right? So what you listen to is not just what people are saying, but where they're silent. And if you find them being silent on Ukraine, if you find them being silent on Russia, the chances that they're taking money from the Russians are very, very high. And so none of the men here are denying that $10 million was taken by tenant media from the Russians. They're just saying, oh, we were duped. We had no idea. And of course, that's ridiculous. They knew exactly what they were doing. But when this came out, the DOJ said that they were following as many as 600 other influencers who might be guilty of the same thing. And so when you think about that, 600 influencers, and you add up, their audience, that is a huge impact. And the chances that the Russians aren't out there trying to buy people off is exactly zero. And since we know that they're doing that, this is how it looks. Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, Russian agents. And they just helped get Trump elected. And, if you have any doubts about Trump and the Russians, all I can say is you've got your head in the sand. This is a video from Peter Boghossian. I'm actually a subscriber to Peter Boghossian on my personal YouTube account. The reason being is that Peter Boghossian is an academic who's taken a stand against wokeness and all of the problems that that's created in academia and in culture. And I agree with what he's saying along those lines. But again, it's not just listening to what people say, but it's listening to what they don't say. And when people are taking these political stands, but they don't take a stand against Russia, the moment you start scratching beneath the surface, what you find are Russian ties. So yes, what I'm doing here is accusing Peter Boghossian of being a Russian asset. And I'll go so far as to say that he knows he's a Russian asset, that he's justified it to himself. They'll say, oh, it was NATO, it was the Russians had to do it, it's wokeness, and the Russians are pushing back against wokeness, all kind of ridiculous shit. The Russians are the great evil on the planet right now. And what they're doing in Ukraine is on the same scale as what the Nazis were doing in World War II, what Stalin was doing to the Soviet states and to his own people. It hasn't reached that high of a tally, but Vladimir Putin has sent 1 million people into the wood chipper. Ukrainians and his own soldiers who are, just as much victims as anybody else. These are ethnic minorities. These are people in poverty. These are people with no rights whatsoever. He's just throwing them into the meat grinder. And so there's really no difference in kind, just difference in overall tally. So it just sickens me and offends me that cultural influencers who claim to be so concerned about people's rights and freedom of speech and democracy are working hand in hand with the Russians. But I didn't necessarily know this about Peter Boghossian until a week or two ago. This just came up in my YouTube feed. And when I was listening to him, all these alarm bells went off. And then I started digging beneath the surface. And what I found is Russian collusion. And I'm going to make that case. But what I'll do here is I'll just play, some of this clip. I'm going to cut it up a little bit for brevity, react to some of the things that he says, but I'm going to show you. I mean, you can look here on the screen and, hey, there's an American flag on the stage. There's all these white people in suits. It's a nice venue. The Danube Institute, I didn't know what the Danube Institute was until I started looking into it. As far as I know, as a naive listener and viewer, he's somewhere here in the United States talking about United States politics and culture. But let me go ahead and let him speak, and then I'll show you that after I listened to this and the alarm bells went off, I started digging beneath the surface, and Peter Boghossian is working hand in glove with the Russians, as are American universities, think tanks, and influencers. And this is the biggest story going right now that's getting almost no attention. So real quick, just for context, this was posted the day after the election.
And now Peter Boghossian is going to discuss what are the consequences for the culture war in the wake of a Trump victory. Peter, over to you.
When a wild dog is captured or cornered, it becomes even more ferocious. I have a sobering message for the people here. If you think a Trump victory is going to make the enemies of civilization, the enemies of cognitive liberty, the enemies of civility itself, any kind of basic freedom, to quote the famous poem, go quietly into this good night, I have a sobering message for you. You're a fool. You're grossly mistaken. That will not happen.
Okay, so just just off the bat, again, as a naive listener, as I was in my car, here's this white woman with an American accent, and now Peter Boghossian is going to tell us what he thinks of the election, and he jumps in comparing the left to a wild dog and an enemy or the enemy of Western civilization, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and the whole deal. And so that's just so vitriolic that right away the alarm bells start ringing. And one then has to question, okay, fine, you think that the woke left is the enemy of civilization based on what? He's big on the trans issue. He really hammers that home. You'll hear him talking about it here in a second. He is an academic that, essentially got ran out of his last job at the Portland State University, right? I don't know why a guy like this would think that he would find a home in Portland. But now he's got an axe to grind with the left because he basically got pushed out of this position. Now he's a professor at the University of Austin, Texas, which is this new university with Barry Weiss and others that they're trying to put together the, cure the ills of wokeness in academia. That's all fine, right? I can see that being a rational position. But if that is one's position, then one better be doubly, triply, quadruply against the Russians. And what you're going to find out is he's got nothing to say about the Russians. And this venue that looks very white and very American is actually the Danube Institute in Hungary. It's a government-funded institute. And Viktor Orban, who is the president who's rolled back all sorts of democratic guardrails in his own country, is working hand in glove with the Russians. And so if you're delivering this message at the Danube Institute in Hungary the day after the election, I have to start asking questions about why you're there and what's motivating you.
I predict that we will see a ferociousness and a tenacity and a pathological vengeance upon the people and the cronies that we have thrown out of office. The people have
pathological vengeance, the cronies we have thrown out of office, not the people that we disagree with that we've voted out of office, who didn't contest the election and didn't storm the Capitol, right? Not the people who, all of a sudden aren't guilty of any of that election meddling that we were poised to accuse them of if our side had lost, and the side that didn't question the election and didn't go tit for tat with January 6th, right? The dissonance in his own message, the dissonance in his own priorities, are just really striking. Just zero intellectual honesty.
Basically terrorized the United States and the rest of the world for, at the very minimum, of 12 years.
Terrorized the United States and the rest of the world for 12 years. If you're in academics, maybe I can see that, right? But what do you mean by terrorize? What do you mean by the United States and the rest of the world? Again, show me the Democrats, show me the wokest of the woke that are storming the Capitol. Show me the wokest of the woke invading another country, kidnapping tens of thousands of its children, destroying dams, flooding villages, drowning people to death, bombing maternity wards, bombing children's hospitals. If this is your true concern, those who are terrorizing the West, you need to follow this up with a strong statement about Russia while you're right next door.
So let's take a look at that landscape. What does it look like? And who holds the levers of power? Here's what we're fighting right now. In my opinion, the most important battle is in the academies. All of our academies are controlled by woke maniacs. All of them. If you look at and this is not these are not my data points, the foundation's FIRE, Greg Lukianoff's organization does an excellent job.
So this is this FIRE organization that says that it's for free speech and academic liberty and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, apparently, these cushy universities where guys like him have basically bought into a lifestyle, right? I want to be an intellectual. I want to hold the microphone. I want people to listen to me. I want to get paid to make lectures and grade papers and all that bullshit. Fine. So the academies have been taken over. Again, maybe there's an argument to be made there. I would actually agree with that. But the world itself is not an academy, and no blood has been spilled by those academics. People have been run out of their careers. That's true. Perhaps we are indoctrinating our young adults with false ideas. That's fine. but nobody is committing the atrocities that the Russians are committing. And if you're concerned about, what's happening in academics, how could you not be concerned about the Russians unless you have made it up to yourself that somehow they are on your side? And if you have done so, you have jumped the shark big time. You have lost the plot. You have no intellectual or moral integrity.
Of breaking down right, left. I don't think that those are very useful demarcations any longer, but just as a placeholder, we can use them. The overwhelming majority of college professors are in the far left camp. That would be one thing, but they're identitarians, as many people on the panel have discussed. So we have the control of the academies still belongs to the far left, not merely the left. The control of teacher colleges of education, where teachers become certified, is controlled by the far left. The media landscape. Now, the good thing about this, the positive news, and this is not a kind of Pollyanna optimism, the positive news is that the media has been damaged tremendously from this. The legacy media, I wouldn't say that it's in tatters, but it's taken a blow. If you look.
Okay, and so this is this trope that people roll out. Everybody likes to beat up on the media until the legacy media, until there's a Category 4 hurricane headed towards Florida, and then everybody's on CNN because they need their Doppler radar, right? They need their meteorologists, they need their team, they need their expertise. Nobody's turning to Peter Boghossian to figure out whether or not the eye of the hurricane is going to pass over their town, right? And so there's this whole thing where we can just throw the old legacy media out and somehow, we're going to turn to Peter Boghossian the next time that there's an earthquake. Show me the legacy media that's taking direct money from the Russians. And if you can, I'll bet you that that's Fox News, that that's Newsmax, that that's OAN.
So let's take a look at the broader culture war. 4 or 5 things pop to mind. One thing, which is crazy, you have normal crazy, and then you have extra crazy. Anything with trans is extra crazy.
Okay, and so that's enough for Peter Boghossian, but just so you know, if you don't really know Peter Boghossian, his capture, his audience capture, his algorithm capture is trans, right? He has been rewarded by the algorithm for speaking out on trans. It's how I found him, right? I have problems with trans. I think trans is a cult. I don't think it's a real thing. And I think, I agree with Sam Harris. I think it in and of itself lost the election for Kamala, just a week or two ago. If you just take trans off the table and the way that people feel about that, there's a good chance that she wins the election. There are problems with trans. He brings up a whistleblower that, outed a big children's hospital in Texas for doing transition surgeries on children. That's a problem. But again, if you're concerned about these few hundred children who are getting these operations that they shouldn't be getting, how can you not be concerned about the minimum 20,000 children that have been kidnapped in Ukraine and sent to essentially be slaves in Russia? That number may be as high as 500,000 because they don't have records on all the children. So here's Peter Boghossian being way overboard. But as I'm listening to this for the first time, as I'm just driving, I have YouTube, just put my phone in my cup holder and driving over to take my dog for a walk. And I'm listening to this and I'm just like, okay, he's way overboard. But I think that he's at an American venue talking to Americans about American politics. And he's not. He's at the Danube Institute speaking to, the Americans in the audience, but he's speaking to a European audience. And he's giving them everything that they need to sleep well at night, knowing that they're on the side of the Russians, who are committing the biggest genocide. Maybe I should take that back because there's Rwanda and others. But the biggest genocide in Europe since World War II. And so this is the Wikipedia page for the Danube Institute. The Danube Institute is a conservative think tank founded in 2013 and based in Budapest. According to its mission statement, the Danube Institute is dedicated to a respectful conservatism in cultural, religious, and social life, the broad classical liberal tradition in economics, and a realistic Atlanticism in national security policy. Okay, sounds good enough, except who do we have over here on the right is an example of somebody who's spoken at the Danube Institute, but our friend Dave Rubin, who has been caught taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Russians. So alarm bells are going off. Why is a guy like Peter Boghossian not in America the day after the election, but is sharing his views, his vitriolic views about throwing out the violent, enemies of Western civilization? What's he doing speaking in Hungary, knowing that Hungary is in bed with the Russians? This is Viktor Orban. He is the president, the leader of Hungary. Here we are, third paragraph. Since 2010, Orban has undermined democracy, weakened judicial independence, and curtailed press freedoms in Hungary. You go, oh, well, you just got Wikipedia to make your point. Well, here's a footnote. It's one of the nice things about Wikipedia. What to do when Viktor Orban erodes democracy, The Economist. And here's the Economist article on Viktor Orban eroding democracy. Europe has the tools to make an autocrat back down. Now, if you're unwilling to accept The Economist as a footnote, I've got nothing to say to you. If you think that you can just write off The Economist as legacy media, The Economist is the #1 news magazine in the world and has been for decades. Anybody who's, at a professional level or an academic level that's into, politics, that's into culture, The Economist is as gold standard as they come. So Viktor Orban is an autocrat. So here's foreignpolicy.com, how Orban became Putin's pawn. And again, if you can't accept the Foreign Policy Journal as a footnote, right, I have nothing really probably that I can say to you. Among all of Russia's useful idiots, few have sought to make themselves more useful than the Hungarian prime minister. Examples of that: Hungary blocks $50 billion of EU funding for Ukraine. And political, Orban threatens to mess with Ukraine aid to help Trump. So the Danube Institute is a Hungarian-funded think tank. Viktor Orban has complete control in Hungary. The Economist, Foreign Policy Journal, Politico paint him as an autocrat. He's in bed with the Russians. Therefore, the Danube Institute is a tool of the Russians. I don't think that's a bridge too far. So it gets worse. Back to Peter Boghossian on YouTube. Here's a video just from 5 days ago. Is Orange Man like Mustache Man? The question is Trump like Hitler? And so if you want to know, you can click on.
Is Trump basically Hitler?
No.
Trump is not Hitler?
No, I don't think so.
So here's Peter Boghossian assuring whoever's listening that Trump isn't like Hitler. Why? He's sitting down with Dr. Ralph Scholhammer. Of course, you've heard of Dr. Ralph Scholhammer, and you're going to listen for an hour and 23 minutes, his historical take on why Trump isn't Hitler, Or maybe you're just going to see the thumbnail or click on the first few seconds and go, oh, I can be relieved that Trump isn't Hitler. Except when I put Dr. Ralph Scholhammer into Google with the Danube Institute, what do I get? Oh, look, I get Dr. Ralph Scholhammer, visiting fellow at Danube Institute. What are the chances, right? And so this is how the echo chamber is created. This is how we launder reputations. This is how we put people's consciences at ease. This is how we take advantage of the overwhelm of information that we have so that everybody's essentially a naive viewer. It's the Danube Institute interviewing the Danube Institute on the part of the Russians to influence American politics and culture. And you think that's a bridge too far? Let me show you something else. This is from the Hungarian Conservative. Heritage Foundation and Danube Institute sign landmark cooperation agreement. What? Excuse me, what? See the CPAC there? So this is the Heritage Foundation. This is the most influential conservative think tank in America that has signed a cooperation agreement with the Hungarian government under the control of Viktor Orban, whom the economists and others describe as both an autocrat and a willing, useful idiot for the Russians. It gets worse. Florida conservatism, refocusing the American right. And so this is a conference talking about conservative Florida politics at the Danube Institute in Hungary. So now Florida politics is being shaped at the Danube Institute. And so this is just from October 3rd. What role might Florida's unique brand of conservatism play in shaping the future of the American right? In our joint event with the Palm Beach Freedom Institute, we will dig into the causes and implications of the shift to the right, to the south, examining the role of Florida as a new epicenter of American conservatism. So this is a huge example of how Russians, through their proxies in Hungary, are shaping American policy. And the amount of money, the amount of incentive that is flowing behind the scenes, that a guy like Peter Boghossian on a professor's salary can afford to be flying back and forth from the Danube Institute the day after the election, that the the Heritage Foundation is signing a cooperation agreement with, what is essentially a tool of the Hungarian government, who has rolled back press freedoms, and we're all supposed to believe that everybody on the right is the protectors of free speech, when press freedoms have been curtailed in Hungary, and when in Russia you can go to jail for holding up a blank sheet of paper. And so get this. I mean, this is just like shooting fish in a barrel when it comes to putting together a conspiracy, right? People, this is a conspiracy theory, or whatever. This is the website for the University of Austin, Texas, this new conservative, anti-woke academic experiment. And I just looked at this guy, Alex Priu. Forgive me if I think maybe that last name sounds Hungarian. I'm not Hungarian. I don't, but I've got Google. And so I put in Alex Priu and the Danube Institute, and what comes up? Philosophy professor Alex Priu on the richness of philosophy. Intersectionality is not the way. Intersectionality is a buzzword in woke circles. Intersectionality is not the way. This clip from a Q&A session at the Danube Institute, Budapest, Hungary. So you see how everybody's coordinating. You see how it all flows through the Danube Institute and how it just then has to be an arm of the Russians, because we know who Viktor Orban is, and Viktor Orban controls everything in Hungary. I think his brother is the director of the Danube Institute. And Viktor Orban, everybody knows, is working on the side of the Russians and has been instrumental in holding up aid to Ukraine, who is experiencing a daily genocide against their own people. So I don't know if that's convincing to you or not, right? All I can do is, share my view and, footnote it as best I can by sharing my screen there. But here you have, Peter Boghossian's got 215,000 followers on YouTube, right? He has significant reach in and of himself. He's a part of this Danube Institute that has hosted Dave Rubin, who got caught taking money from the Russians. You got the Heritage Foundation, which is the #1 conservative think tank in the United States, think CPAC and all of that, and they're signing a cooperation agreement with the Danube Institute. And here we have Peter Boghossian, interviewing a professor from the Danube Institute to put us all at ease that, oh, no, as a history professor, let me tell you that Trump is not Hitler. And then at the University of Austin, Texas, I just pick a name out of the hat, and guess who's spoken at the Danube Institute? And so if you're going through the Danube Institute, if you're at the Danube Institute, you are in the presence of FSB agents, that is the former KGB. You are pressing flesh with the Kremlin. And the chances that they aren't outright offering you money, the chances that they aren't outright offering you incentives to take a certain line, to amplify certain cultural positions that perhaps you already have. And perhaps there's a lot of legitimacy to those positions, but you amplify those positions. You speak out against trans, and you speak out against what that's doing to minors in the United States, but you don't say a word about the Russians. You don't say a word about the tens of thousands of children that the Russians have kidnapped. You don't mention that over the summer, the Russians intentionally bombed a children's hospital in Ukraine, right? You stay quiet on that. And you just make up whatever stories you need to put your conscience at ease. You blame it on the left. You blame it on, woke America and liberal Europe. And you say that's the cause for the war, and not that just the Russians will do evil as the Russians do. And I guess the last thought I will, put forward here is that Russian evil, if anything, if any good can come out of it, can be a way for us to orient ourselves morally and ethically as we move through the world. That's the #1 evil. The biggest threat to the world are Russian nuclear weapons. The second biggest threat to the world is the authoritarianism and repression and corruption that the Russians seek to take over with. We just put Trump in, and now he's putting in Tulsi Gabbard, who is a Russian asset, who is, I'm convinced, taking millions of dollars directly from the Russians. She's going to be the director of our national intelligence, right? They want to spread that evil and corruption as far as they can throughout the globe. And it looks like the Danube Institute.